Have you ever had that feeling, like maybe deep down, that your thoughts aren't entirely yours?
Well, maybe you feel stuck, like in patterns you just can't seem to break no matter what you try.
Exactly. What if?
Yeah.
What if the reality you perceive, your beliefs, even who you think you are, what if it's more like software running on your brain?
And crucially, what if that software can be rewritten?
Welcome, everyone, to the deep dive.
Our mission here is pretty straightforward. We take complex ideas, sometimes really dense stuff, and we try to boil them down.
Yeah, distill them into the essential nuggets of insight, help you get informed without that feeling of information overload.
And today we're diving deep, really deep, into how your mind actually constructs reality, drawing heavily from Robert Anton Wilson's, frankly, mind-bending book, Prometheus Rising.
It's a fascinating one. For this exploration, we're pulling from a few key sources. We've got a detailed study guide, a pretty comprehensive briefing document.
And also some excerpts from a YouTube transcript that really helps illuminate Wilson's model of consciousness. It's quite a set of tools.
Absolutely. So our mission for this deep dive, it's really to unpack this idea, this possibility that you might be living in a reality that's been, well, largely programmed for you.
But more importantly, perhaps, is exploring how you might begin to jailbreak your own mind, how you can start taking back control of your perceptions.
All right, let's jump in. So Wilson presents this core model right at the start, the thinker and the prover.
Yeah, this is fundamental. He basically argues it's the engine, the core mechanism for how we build our perceived reality.
Okay, so break that down. The thinker. What's that about?
Well, Wilson paints the thinker as like the novelist inside your head, or the myth maker, the inventor.
Your storyteller.
Exactly. It's the part of your brain that generates all your beliefs, your narratives, your models of the world. Everything from the world is dangerous to I'm not good enough, or even political or religious convictions. It just creates them.
Okay, so the thinker comes up with the ideas, the beliefs. Then what about the prover?
Ah, the prover. Wilson describes this part as maybe like a silent accountant, or maybe a really enthusiastic hype man.
A hype man.
Yeah, because whatever the thinker decides to believe, the prover's job is simply to go out and find evidence to confirm it. Period.
So if my thinker decides, say, all politicians are corrupt,
then your prover will immediately start highlighting every news story, every comment, every little incident that seems to confirm that belief. It'll unconsciously filter out anything that contradicts it.
Wow, okay. And that creates a loop then.
Precisely. It's a continuous, self-reinforcing feedback loop. The thinker believes something, the prover finds proof, which strengthens the thinker's belief, which makes the prover look even harder for more proof.
And that makes your belief feel like objective reality, like it's just true.
Exactly. And Wilson argues this applies to everything. Your sense of self-worth, your political views, your deepest convictions. They are largely products of this internal loop, not some reflection of objective truth.
One of the sources puts it really starkly. It says, every belief you hold is a little parasite that distorts your perception. That's potent.
It really is. And what's fascinating, and maybe a bit unsettling, is how Wilson stresses this isn't just about, weirdos and zealots, as he puts it.
Right. It's not just other people.
No. He says this process explains you. It challenges that comfortable lie of objectivity we all kind of cling to, even those of us who think we're super rational.
He uses examples like Galileo and Einstein, doesn't he?
Yeah, brilliant scientists. Yet, even with their methods, they were still operating within their own thinker-prover loops. Galileo faced resistance not just from the church, but from scientific peers whose existing proofs couldn't accommodate his findings.
And Einstein, for all his genius, his thinker believed in a certain kind of deterministic universe, so his prover had trouble fully accepting the implications of quantum mechanics, right?
Exactly. Even the greatest minds have their provers working overtime to confirm what their thinkers have decided is true.
It reminds me of that famous story Wilson uses, the one about William James and the old woman.
Oh, the turtles all the way down story, yes.
Yeah. She says the world rests on a giant turtle,
Yeah.
which rests on another turtle, and so on.
And James asks what the bottom turtle stands on, and she says, "You're very clever, young man, very clever, but it's turtles all the way down."
Right. And we might laugh, but Wilson's point is, well, her belief system isn't necessarily any more or less grounded than any fundamental belief system when you trace it back far enough, even scientific ones.
It's all built on something the thinker just posits, some fundamental turtle. The point isn't who's right. It's that we're all standing on what Wilson might call hallucinated foundations. Our provers just make them feel solid.
So the implication is, You're basically living in a kind of trance, constantly proving what you already believe about yourself and the world, and mostly unaware you're even doing it.
Yeah. The real power, Wilson suggests, comes when you dare to notice your thinker choosing a belief, when you catch your prover in the act of hunting for evidence.
That sounds like it takes some serious self-awareness.
Brutal honesty, surgical self-observation, as one source puts it. But that's where the potential for change really lies, noticing the loop.
Okay, so that's the thinker-prover loop.
Hmm.
But then Wilson takes it another step, framing the brain itself in a really interesting way. Not as a fixed machine, but as programmable.
Exactly. He uses the metaphor of the brain functioning as if it were a computer, with input, output, feedback, memory.
But he's careful about that metaphor, right? He calls it a dangerously useful lie.
Yes, very important distinction. He's focused on usefulness, not literal truth. It's a model to help us understand and potentially change how our minds operate, not a claim that the brain is a digital computer.
Got it. And within that model, he talks about wetware versus software.
Right. The wetware is the physical stuff, the neurons, the gray matter, the blood vessels.
Yeah.
The meat, as he sometimes calls it, it can be damaged, obviously.
But the software,
Yeah.
that's different.
That's the code. Our beliefs, our habits, traumas, phobias, loyalties, our automatic reactions. Wilson argues these are all essentially software programs running on the wetware.
And this software defines our identity.
Largely, yes. But here's the kicker. It all feels like hardware.
What do you mean?
Well, when you say I'm shy or I'm bad at math or I always procrastinate, it feels like a fundamental, unchangeable fact about you, right? Like part of the brain's physical structure.
Yeah.
But Wilson says, no, that's just a line of code. It's a program that got installed, probably through conditioning or maybe an imprint, and it's running automatically.
And the truly radical idea, then, is that this software isn't fixed.
Exactly. It can be debugged, deleted, or overwritten. That's the path to liberation he talks about. You can, in essence, learn to code your own mind.
That connects to his idea that you were always tripping, doesn't it? Which sounds provocative.
It does. But he doesn't just mean psychedelic drugs, though he discusses them. He means all experience is filtered, colored, adjusted by these invisible, automatic neurolinguistic processes. Your brain is constantly constructing your reality based on its programming.
So everyday perception is a kind of trip.
In his model, yes. Psychedelics, he argues, just make the controls, the filtering mechanisms, temporarily visible. They reveal the software that's always running.
Okay, and he breaks down this software into different types based on how it gets installed.
Yeah, 4 main categories that shape our identity. First, there are genetic imperatives. That's the deep, hardwired stuff. Lizard brain basics, not much choice there.
Okay, survival instincts, that kind of thing.
Right. Then comes imprinting. These are usually one-off, high-intensity experiences that carve deep, often permanent channels, like a serious trauma or maybe a first love or a powerful religious experience. Less flexible, very hard to change without specific techniques.
Like a brand on the nervous system.
Good way to put it. Third is conditioning. This is slower, more like Pavlov's dogs. Repetition, reward, punishment. Think about school, your family rules, office culture, advertising.
Learning through repeated association.
Exactly. It's more flexible than imprinting. You can unlearn conditioned responses, but it's often invisible because it's just the water we swim in.
And the last one.
Learning. This is the softest, most flexible type of code. It represents our ability to consciously acquire new information, adapt, change our minds based on new data. Wilson sees this as the door out of the maze.
The potential for conscious change.
Right. It's where real adaptability happens.
So if our identity is largely software made up of these different kinds of programming, that leads to his concept of reality tunnels, right? What exactly are those?
Think of a reality tunnel as your personal user interface for navigating the world. It's the specific collection of software scripts, your imprints, conditioning, learning, beliefs from the thinker-prover loop that determines what you notice, what you filter out, and how you interpret everything.
So two people can experience the exact same event, but have totally different realities because their tunnels are different.
Absolutely. Think of people watching a political protest. One person's tunnel shows brave citizens standing up for rights. Another person's tunnel shows dangerous radicals disrupting order. Same external data, completely different perceived reality based on their internal software.
And these aren't just individual things.
No, that's key. They're often shared illusions. Culture, language, nationality, religion. These create massive, shared reality tunnels that groups of people inhabit together. Wilson's point is stark. There is no objective perception. There is only tunnel vision pretending to be normal.
Wow. Okay. That's a lot to take in. The idea that there's no objective view, just tunnels.
It can feel destabilizing at first, but Wilson frames it as potentially liberating.
How so?
Because the terrifying but also freeing realization is that there is no grown-up, no central authority running the show, pulling the strings behind these tunnels.
It's
just you and your code. Recognizing that voice in your head saying you can't or you must is just a script. That's the first step. Realizing it's just code means, potentially, you can become the coder.
You can start the debugging process.
Exactly. You can start rewriting.
All right, Wilson then digs even deeper, proposing these 4 neurological circuits that develop sequentially, each building a kind of foundational layer for our reality tunnel.
Yeah, he maps these onto developmental stages. The first circuit is the oral biosurvival circuit. It gets imprinted right at birth, maybe even before.
Oral biosurvival. So basic needs, safety.
Totally. Its core function is the binary command. Safe or unsafe, approach or withdraw. It's about fundamental trust versus mistrust. The imprint comes from the infant's earliest experiences, warmth, consistency, nourishment, or the lack thereof.
And this imprint is powerful.
Extremely. Wilson says it's branded into the nervous system like a cattle mark. It determines whether your baseline assumption about the universe is that it's fundamentally benevolent or fundamentally hostile.
And if the imprint is insecure, if that early safety wasn't there,
that can lead to lifelong patterns of fear, anxiety, rigidity, a deep craving for external control, for certainty, which might manifest as attraction to authoritarian leaders, rigid ideologies, cults, or intense nationalism. It's the nervous system seeking safety signals it missed early on.
And you mentioned addiction earlier in relation to this.
Yes, Wilson links it directly. Addictive behaviors, especially oral ones, overeating, smoking, excessive talking, maybe even constant phone scrolling, can become attempts to soothe that primal unmet need for comfort and safety, feeding that oral feedback loop.
Can this deep imprint even be changed?
Wilson suggests it's possible but difficult. Usually requires states of neurological vulnerability, moments of intense fear, deep meditation, psychedelic experiences, sometimes shock or trauma combined with conscious intent and often ritual. It's about accessing and potentially re-imprinting that foundational level.
He connects this circuit to Charles Dickens, doesn't he?
Yeah, as a literary metaphor. Dickens' obsessions, hunger, poverty, injustice, orphans searching for warmth and safety, the longing for rescue. Wilson sees these as embodying a First Circuit worldview dominated by those early survival needs and anxieties.
Okay, so that's the first layer. What comes next?
As the toddler starts moving around, exploring, bumping into things and people, the Second Circuit activates. This is the anal emotional-territorial circuit.
Anal, like toilet train.
That's the developmental anchor point, yeah. It's about mastering the body, but more broadly, it's about power, control, territory, social status, and the emergence of the ego. Who's top dog? Who's bottom dog? Where do I fit in the pecking order?
So this is where ego develops.
Yes, the sense of self as a social organism negotiating space and status. The imprint here is shaped by early power struggles, wins and losses, experiences of dominance or submission, praise or humiliation. This forms our basic ego strategies, becoming the bully, the helper, the rebel, the quiet one.
These are strategies for navigating the social world.
Exactly. Defending psychological territory. Wilson says this circuit drives everything from playground politics to international conflicts. He has that provocative line calling war toilet training with guns.
Suggesting it's rooted in these primitive territorial power struggles.
Pretty much. And shame is a key tool used by others to control this circuit, bypassing logic to enforce social norms and hierarchies. Rewiring this involves recognizing these power games, using humor or parody to deflate ego's seriousness, and awareness training.
And the literary example here is James Joyce.
Right. Wilson contrasts him with Dickens. Joyce's difficult style, his focus on internal status struggles, rebellion, challenging the reader. Wilson interprets this as embodying that Second Circuit drive for dominance and ego assertion.
It's fascinating how he suggests your preference for Dickens or Joyce might reveal which of these first two circuits is more dominant in your own neurology.
Yeah, it's less about literary taste, more about which operating system feels more familiar or resonant to your own imprinted reality tunnel.
Okay, moving on. The third circuit. This one is uniquely human, right?
Yes, the time-binding symbolic circuit. This kicks in as we develop language and symbolic thought. It allows us to use symbols, words, maps, and syntax to represent the world and, crucially, to bind time.
Bind time. What does that mean?
It's a concept from Alfred Korzybski. It means we can learn from the past experiences of others, recorded in language, and project plans into the future. It allows for accumulated knowledge, culture, civilization itself. We don't have to rediscover fire every generation.
That sounds incredibly powerful. But there's a catch.
A huge catch, according to Korzybski and Wilson, and that is the map is not the territory.
We mistake the word or the concept for the actual thing.
Precisely. Language slices reality into categories, creates abstractions, and we forget these are just tools, just maps, and we start treating them as reality, arguing over definitions as if the word is the thing. Wilson calls this neuro-linguistic psychosis.
So this circuit can trap us.
Absolutely. In rigid definitions, ideologies, bureaucracies, where the map, the rules, the labels becomes more important than the actual territory, the people, the situation, words become triggers for automatic reactions instead of tools for thinking.
How do you rewire this one?
Wilson suggests things that break down semantic rigidity. Humor, paradox, Zen koans, practicing E-prime, trying to speak without using the verb to be to force more operational descriptions. Treating language playfully and flexibly.
He also connects this to modern anxieties like information overload.
Yeah, the war of speeds. Our symbolic circuit is bombarded with information at an accelerating rate via media. For some, this cognitive overload triggers a kind of neurological panic, causing them to decelerate, to retreat into simpler, more rigid maps like nationalism or fundamentalism, seeking certainty in a complex world.
Okay, that leads us to the fourth circuit, the socio-sexual circuit. When does this come online?
Around puberty. This circuit integrates our nervous system with the specific social and moral templates of our tribe, our culture. It governs social roles, mating rituals, sexuality, ethics, and tribal belonging.
So learning the rules of the adult social game.
Exactly. The imprint here is shaped by early sexual experiences, social acceptance or rejection, praise, shame, trauma related to social roles and morality. This sculpts our erotic template, what we find attractive, and our self-worth algorithm, how we measure our value within the group.
And morality, in this view, isn't absolute.
Not on this circuit, no. It's crowd-enforced.
Yeah.
It's learned through peer approval, emotional feedback, internalizing the tribe's taboos and values. What feels like conscience is often our nervous system reacting to the social weather, anticipating approval or disapproval.
This seems to explain a lot about conformity.
Definitely. It enforces tribal norms, creates powerful taboos, and leads us to identify strongly with our social roles: student, parent, worker, political party member. Wilson argues that much of what we call our identity is actually a performance dictated by these Fourth Circuit scripts.
And rewiring this
Requires awareness, recognizing roles as performances, not fixed identities, experimenting with behaviors that violate your imprinted shoulds and shouldn'ts, maybe challenging gender norms, questioning tribal loyalties, finding value outside group approval.
This also seems highly relevant to today's culture wars.
Wilson's framework would see many of these debates about gender, politics, morality as fundamentally imprint conflicts. Different groups operating from different Fourth Circuit programming, where one person's deeply felt moral clarity is another's trauma response.
Which explains why logical arguments often fail completely.
Right. You're not debating ideas, you're triggering deeply imprinted neurological circuits linked to identity and belonging.
Okay, so we have these circuits, this programming. We've talked about imprinting and conditioning from parents, school, media. How do we actually start taking back control? How do we begin this reprogramming?
Well, first is recognizing the mechanisms, understanding how conditioning works, how those formatting agents, family, TV, ads, social media, installed so much of our internal monologue, often without our consent. Differentiating between the deep one-off imprints and the slower drip of conditioning.
And then there's the crucial role of attention. You mentioned Wilson emphasizes this.
Hugely. He calls attention the most valuable resource on Earth. Not gold, not oil, not data, your attention. Because whoever or whatever captures your attention gets to program your nervous system in that moment.
Every scroll, every click, every show we watch, it's potentially reinforcing or installing code.
Exactly. It's a constant siege on your attention. Being mindful of where your attention goes is maybe the first most critical step in taking back control. Are you consciously choosing where to direct it, or is it being hijacked by algorithms and outrage?
So what's the ultimate goal here? What's the call to action from Wilson's perspective?
The goal isn't necessarily to become some perfectly rational, unprogrammed being. That's probably impossible. The goal is to stop believing by accident.
To become conscious of the process.
Yes. To consciously choose what spell to cast next, as Wilson poetically puts it, to become your own programmer, your own hacker. The glitch, the anomaly that rewrites its own code.
That sounds empowering,
Yeah.
but also really challenging.
It requires that brutal honesty and surgical self-observation we talked about earlier, really noticing what pulls your strings before you react. Tracing your feelings and reactions back to the underlying beliefs, the thinker-prover loops, the circuit activations, asking, whose script is this?
Kicking back the editor's seat.
Precisely. One source quotes Wilson, "You are not your thoughts. You are not your evidence. You are the magician deciding what spell to cast next." That's the essence of it.
So this whole deep dive, it's not just about understanding these fascinating, maybe slightly strange concepts. It's about potentially gaining a tool.
A weapon even, as one source puts it, the power to consciously edit the software that's been defining your experience of yourself and the world.
Well, we've certainly covered a lot of ground today. We journey deep into the mechanics of the mind, according to Robert Anton Wilson, from that core thinker-prover loop.
Through the idea of the brain as programmable software, the reality tunnels we live in, and those four-layered neurological circuits shaping our experience.
And we looked at how conditioning works and why managing your attention is so absolutely critical in this model.
So we want to leave you with a final thought, something to maybe turn over in your mind after this.
Now that you've heard these ideas, now that you know, or at least have considered, that your reality might be programmable, that you might have the power to debug and rewrite your own code.
What spell will you choose to cast next? For yourself, for how you interact with the world around you. How will you consciously choose to direct that most valuable resource, your attention?
We really hope this deep dive has given you some fresh perspectives, maybe even sparked a little bit of a psychological jailbreak, perhaps?
Keep observing, keep noticing your own reactions, the scripts playing out. Start exploring, even in small ways, how you can consciously shape your own experience.
And if this exploration resonated with you, if it sparked something, we'd be grateful if you'd hit that like button, maybe leave a comment, sharing your own thoughts or experiences.
And definitely subscribe to the deep dive if you haven't already for more explorations into ideas that matter.
Thank you so much for joining us on this journey today.
It's been fascinating. Until next time, keep digging deep.